Hey, you guys, welcome back to my channel. If you don't know who I am, my name is Alison. I am a Christian women's life coach, and you can find me on Instagram at A Devotional Heart. I started this channel about 3 months ago to interview Christians, especially Orthodox Christians, so I could learn from them. I'm a catechumen in the Orthodox faith, and today I have a guest who helped introduce me to Orthodoxy, and I'm so honored that he agreed to spend some time with us today. His name is Jay Dyer. Probably everybody watching this right now knows who he is. He's an author, comedian, and TV presenter known for his deep analysis of Hollywood, geopolitics, and culture. His graduate work focused on psychological warfare and film, and he's the author of 2 books, Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2, and the co-creator and co-host of the television show Hollywood Decoded. He's been featured on numerous popular shows and podcasts and has been in debates with some of the world's top debaters. Jay, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Yeah, I've been watching quite a few of your shows because it's all of my friends, all of our friends. So
yeah, we have a lot of the same mods. And I also wanted to thank you so much for helping promote my channel. I just hit 1,000 subscribers, and you've shared on Instagram and Telegram and Twitter and YouTube some of my episodes. So I just really wanted to thank you for that. And we're just gonna, my goal for today's episode is to create something that all of my audience can share with their friends who maybe have never heard of Jay Dyer before, because there are, believe it or not, people who haven't heard of him. So if you want high-level debates and amazing hours and hours of education, you're going to go to his YouTube or his website. But today we're going to start with the basics. Jay, can you tell us just a little bit about your life and education and how and why you started creating content and writing books?
Well, I was studying philosophy and film in undergrad and graduate school. And then at the same time, I was blogging a bunch. This was back in the 2000s, late 2000s. And then I started kind of refining my interests and what I was blogging about more and more to specific areas and subjects relating to, initially I was talking about a lot of political stuff and some theology and some movie stuff too, but then I kind of shifted away from the political stuff into things that I was just more interested in. And for a long time, I was really just focusing on film analysis, movies, symbolism, and just because that's what I found interesting. And I was taking a lot of classes at the time that dealt with that. And so by the time that I was working on my grad program stuff, I kind of expanded into looking at geopolitics and how it relates to propaganda. And I always had interest in, theology and the Bible and all of that for a long time, but they were kind of separate issues. And then like I said, over time, probably about by 2014, 15, I was more so writing and blogging and writing essays pretty consistently about all those topics, maybe 2 or 3 posts a week. And so over a while that kind of built up, and then that turned into a book. And then we started doing a few kind of smaller type TV shows that I got invited on. And then we did a TV show based on roughly what's in the first book, and I think 2018, that ran on Gaia for 1 season. And then had a second book come out, which was the sequel to the first book. And then started getting, more offers to do other things. And I around 2017, 18, I had expanded out of blogging into podcasting, and then I expanded into videos. So, over time you realize that, if you want to get an audience, you really have to do the video content. So, so now it's kind of all those things. And basically I just look at theology, philosophy, film, geopolitics, And every now and then I've done some literature stuff. I may go back into doing lit stuff too, because kind of feel like, I mean, I really enjoy movie analysis, but I feel like I've done all of the movies that are really that good or relevant. So we might move into doing more literary stuff. I like to get into analyzing, some C.S. Lewis books, or maybe some Dostoevsky or something like that, on top of, kind of the rest of the stuff that's out there. But doing more of the theology content didn't really start consistently until about 5 years ago, where it was kind of inadvertent. I got invited to do a few public debates with atheists, and I didn't want to say no. And so I did it. And then that kind of snowballed into its own other thing that I do, doing the debates, which again, there wasn't really any plan to do that, but I'd always done public debates back to college, and was on the debate team and all that kind of stuff. So in the philosophy club that we had at college. So it's just something that I've always done on the side, as well as film analysis, as well as, even doing my own kind of weird comedy skits that are kind of in the vein of like Sam Hyde or Tim and Eric type weird stuff. So really it's just, I kind of just do whatever I want and throw the content out there, and then, like, it sticks to the wall or it doesn't, like people like it or they don't. And I started doing it full time, I guess, about 2016. I think it was about the time I was able to no longer have kind of a normie job. I could do this full time. And then it just kind of snowballed and turned into what it is now, which, I host the 4th hour of ALEXJONES, and do a lot of, interviews, podcasts, debates, etc. I've been kind of off and on working on another book for a long time, but that ended up turning into a huge project. So I'm not sure about when I'll do the 3rd book. But anyway, yeah, so and then I've kind of been expanding into talking a lot about crypto in the last 6 months to a year. So it's just really, those are all the areas that I'm interested in. And that's what I talk about. It's just all the stuff that I know about.
And your debates are so popular. I mean, everybody's always talking about them. And then you have the Discord. Can you explain how that works? I actually don't even know what it is. I haven't been in there.
Well, Discord is like another type of social media platform that was originally intended for gamers. So it's kind of a different format than Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. It's more of a situation where people can go into a server, which is where you have all these different channels. And then, so my server is the Orthodox one, and it ended up growing and getting really big. I think there's about 7,500 people in there. In the last couple of years, it grew. And so it ended up being a kind of another thing that happened on its own, where it's been a good way to bring people to Orthodoxy, because Discord has a feature that allows giant rooms of people to be on audio. Mm-hmm. So basically you can have 100, 200, 300 people in an audio chat where people ask questions, or people come and I let them debate. They can make whatever arguments they want. So it's not just a debate thing. Oftentimes it's that, but there's a lot of people who don't have any interest in debating. And so we let people come and do Q&A. And that might be, sometimes we do it for 9 hours a day. So we have, basically just 9 hours of people asking questions, and it's big enough that, there's always people in there. There's always people in the room. There's always at least, a couple thousand people online. And so they'll pile in there and just ask whatever they want. So, but there's a lot of other subjects in there. There's threads where people are in there. It's kind of like the way that message boards used to work on the internet, maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, where you could just find all these different threads, except the difference here is that there's not just threads of text. It's also voice rooms where people can interact through voice. It's like a giant phone call, basically. So that's the advantage of it. And Discord appeals to a lot of, people basically 30 and under. So boomers hate it. And pretty much everybody in Discord hates Facebook. They don't go on Facebook anymore. So, So it's been a fortuitous providential thing that happened on its own that speaks to a lot of younger people to get them interested in Orthodoxy. And so We've had, quite a few clergy come in there, and there's moderators that are other Orthodox people and apologists. And so it's not just me. I don't control everything. We have quite a few priests and deacons and even some bishops that have come and done lectures and so forth.
Wow, cool. And then, so I am a member of your website, and I encourage everybody watching right now to go to jaysanalysis.com and sign up. It's $5 a month, and you have access to hours and hours. It's so many different topics. And so, Jay, my favorite series so far that I found on there is your Tragedy and Hope series.
Oh, cool.
And
Thank you.
I haven't finished it yet. I'm working on some Father Peter Here's courses and yours, and so it's taking me a while to get through all of them. But for people who don't know anything about Tragedy and Hope, how could you possibly summarize this huge book? Just give us a little bit of a background of what it is and how and why you've talked for 8 or 10 videos that are like 2 hours each, right? So good. What is it? And
So that was about 4 or 5 years ago when I was getting the idea to expand into other areas beyond just kind of doing film analysis. And I got to thinking, well, I read a lot. A lot of people don't have time to read. And so why don't I kind of just do what I always wanted to do, which is probably to be some kind of professor. I either wanted to be a stand-up comedian or a professor. And then stand-up comedy really just for me turned into a cringe thing where it's all just woke stuff. And so I quit being interested in that a long time ago. And then I realized that, oh, guess what? The domain of academia is also cringe woke. So you're not really going to go very far in academia unless you're, a cringe woke person. So I thought, well, why don't I can do this on the internet, right? I can have an audio file and put it up on the website, and then, figuring out ways to basically charge for that, which is actually way cheaper than university education. And being that I had spent a lot on university education, I realized that it seems like the future will be people learning on their own. And this, the university system is kind of a archaic dinosaur system that will probably go away. So I really wanted to just sort of forge my own way. Always want to be my own boss. I was getting tired of having, bitchy managers all the time at these different wage jobs. And when I realized that probably wasn't going to be able to be a professor due to the degree of wokeness that's required for the professor cult, just like the entertainment cult, I was like, what am I going to do? Well, might as well just try to at least try out doing my own content. So that's what I did. And then I thought, well, what do people want to know about that they don't know about? And I read all these tons and tons of books over the years, so I should just summarize that material. And basically nobody else does that. I mean, there's people who do courses and there are people who write books about this, but nobody had done a lecture through Tragedy and Hope because it's a gigantic 1,300 page, really boring technical geopolitical tome. So I focused all my Spurg powers and I read the whole thing and then put it into like you said, 8 lectures at about 2 hours each. And a lot of people have really found value in that. And that kind of kicked off the pattern of doing lectures in different arenas. So there's the Global Elite book series is what was kind of basically kicked off by that book. And what I do is I just basically take the writings of the most powerful elite geopolitical type people, power people in the last 100 years, and read their book and analyze it and summarize it. And so I'm basically a glorified nerd that does your homework for you. And so Tragedy and Hope, as you said, I'm rambling, but Tragedy and Hope was the first one that kicked all that off because I'd heard so much about the book. I'd read excerpts here and there and seen people talk about it in maybe a 1 hour talk or a 2 hour talk, but nobody had lectured through the book. So I thought, why don't I just do that? And it's probably one of the most important geopolitical works of the last century because it was written by a person who was very high up in the power structure of the West. Dr. Carroll Quigley, was a military historian and a archivist / historian for the Council on Foreign Relations, which is one of these really elite sort of power block committee type organizations that basically sets policy for what we could call the Anglo-American establishment. Dr. Quigley has another book called The Anglo-American Establishment, which is about the dominant power structure in the West for the last century. And so those two books kind of work as complementary things that give an inside approach. Now, remember, this is not a quote conspiracy text. This is just a normative geopolitical text that really wouldn't have been known to anybody unless they were going to grad school, maybe in the 60s and 70s for international relations. And it was also given out to CIA section chiefs. So this is really just a book for people in the system at a somewhat of a high level, and particularly people in in grad school. And so it divulged a lot about how the world works in the real way. And so it's not a conspiracy text, it's more of a just cold analysis text that also includes some apologetics and defense for why the Western power block does what it does. So basically, Quigley grounds everything in the Western democratic capitalist ethos and says, well, this is clearly the best option for all the world. And so it may not be ideal to have world wars engineered by these people, but ultimately it's for the good of the whole world. And so Quigley is, of course, a advocate of mass depopulation. He's an advocate of everything that we're seeing kind of promoted by that same global elite power structure today. And he had written that book back in the 60s. So, so basically, it's a defense of why they're doing what they're doing, because at that time in the 60s, there were a lot of people who were recruited into various, governmental jobs, various NGOs, various, intelligence positions, who didn't really understand, well, why would we be funding communist movements? Why would we be funding liberal socialist movements if we are America, we're anti-communist? Why do we do things at times that don't seem to make sense with our ethos? And so the book is basically a huge explanation of why. And so it's a defense of internationalism, basically, and the fact that the nation state is an old archaic system and it needs to cave to basically international unelected managerial technocratic experts is really what the book's about. So it's probably the most important text for all of that, for proving the reality to the international move towards a global government, for proving the fiat debt-based money system is a scam. The first 100, 200 pages is about that. Showing that the elite intentionally fund liberal socialist type causes, typically as a social engineering tool, for proving that there's a shadow government that runs the public so-called elected officials, proving that there's a plan to implement a technocracy. It's the text for that. Now there's, as I mentioned, dozens of other texts that go along with that. And so that's what I do in that Global Elite book series, is really just read through all the writings of the elite. And what's funny is that most of the people who don't like me or what I do, they will never touch or talk about any of that. 90% of the people who don't like what I do or skeptical or whatever, it's always just about me. They'll say, oh, he's a bad person, he's mean, he does this, but nobody will ever talk about these books or debunk because they're real. What are you going to say? Like, oh, there was one time there was a guy who wrote for some big normie publication. I think it was a Daily Beast writer, and he had gone after me on Twitter one day out of nowhere. And he was a doctor, and he was basically saying that Jonas Salk never wrote the books Survival of the Wisest and I have the books. Like, I took a picture of the book and put it up on Twitter. It's like, you saying this book doesn't exist? But that's basically the level to which the people who are more or less in denial or don't know anything about geopolitics, international relations, or anything like that, they just will just say, no, it doesn't exist. There's no such thing, right? It's either gaslighting or they're just totally ignorant, and it can be either one. But yeah, so that's what that is just that's basically a course in that, and that was the first one that I did. And then since then we've done about 50, maybe going into 55 global elite texts and white papers and these kinds of things as well.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying your white paper analysis, especially the one you've been doing over the last week or so. And I'll
thank you.
put the link to that in the description. And I'll put several links for my audience to go and find out more about everything we've been talking about so far. And another topic I really wanted to ask you about is ecumenism, for people who don't know what that is, or maybe what's wrong with it, or why we should be learning about it. Can you summarize or tell us a little bit?
Many years ago, Father Peter Heers wrote a little book about how originally back in maybe the late 1800s, early 1900s, the initial impetus for ecumenism from the vantage point of the Orthodox had the specific intent to reconcile the other churches to the Orthodox faith. So it's not necessarily that it was always bad or everybody, because the word itself is the same word as the ecumenical councils, right? So we're trying to basically heal problems that have occurred and bring people to the Orthodox faith. But what happened was that over time, geopolitical powers and interests were very motivated to use this kind of an idea as a tool to re-engineer what it means for Christianity to do evangelism at all. And so this is very well documented. For example, in the Rockefellers' biography, they have whole chapters where they discuss their co-opting of ecumenism and why they did that, and why they put money into basically founding not just the United Nations, but World Council churches, national council churches. And this is really to steer, from their vantage point, most easily the Protestant churches, but also, if they could, the Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, into basically to make the churches into NGOs or non-governmental organizations, which are basically just adjuncts of the state or the corporate state. And so ecumenism, they saw, was a very useful potential tool for doing that, because it could be a form of what eventually in American geopolitics gets called soft power. And soft power is an idea where, rather than hard power, warfare, you're exerting your influence through other means, covert means. It could be economic means, it could be propaganda means, media means. All of those things are versions of soft power. And I think it's from Harvard. Joseph Nye is the international famous philosopher or strategist who wrote about soft power. And so ecumenism is a version of that, where the churches are subjected to the ideals of the power elite, which in our case would be the private banking interests and corporate interests in America that would like to see Christianity turn into something that they could use. So it's basically a way to co-opt and subvert the churches away from the supernatural theology and turn it into things like social gospel, turn it into things like liberation theology. Those are examples of turning Christianity into a tool of a power block. And this is nothing new, because, of course, in the history of the church, there have been many times when the church had to kind of go to war with the state or various private power blocks or families who would try to co-opt and use the church for their own interest. For example, in the iconoclast controversy, there was a lot of there were iconoclast or heterodox emperors who basically wanted to use the church as the extension of their version of heterodox Christianity. Thus, this is all, if you can think about this in terms of power plays as well, because if the emperor can control the church, then missionary work now becomes an extension of the empire. It's no longer about converting people to Christ. It's about the empire extending its power and its influence. So you can see this with the British Empire, right? The British Empire would see Christianity, particularly the Anglican Church, as its one of its arms of extension and power. So America, as the American imperium, is no different. They see the church as a thing that they would like to use. And I'm not speaking of Joe Biden per se, but the real power behind America, that is the really wealthy families, the private central banks, and the Fortune 100. They would like to see America be used, or excuse me, the churches in America be used as a tool of soft power. And this actually, we know what this was now. It's called the doctrinal warfare program. And we know who headed it up was a guy named C.D. Jackson, who worked together with various Jesuits like John Courtney Murray, who's like the most famous American Jesuit during the time of Vatican II. And David Wimoff has a whole 1,000-page book on this, documenting it all beyond any shadow of a doubt. He's a lawyer, so it's very well documented. A Catholic lawyer, by the way, not an Orthodox or Protestant guy. But the book really demonstrates how the doctrinal warfare program in that book, it shows how it was able to subvert the Roman Catholic Church, and basically to make the Roman Catholic Church into an engine of Americanism. And that's a big part of explaining what's going on in the Roman Catholic Church today. Now, I'm not saying it's everything. I mean, there's spiritual issues. There's, even darker sort of satanic issues when it comes to the ritual abuse. But that all is partly explained by the geopolitical stuff I'm talking about, which a lot of people don't know about. They don't know that, for example, entire books have been written about how the Rockefellers wanted to use missionaries basically as extensions of Americanism and their Standard Oil empire. So there have been Senate hearings or hearings in the 1990s about the CIA using missionaries, Protestant missionaries. It's a very well-known thing if people research it, but most people just have no idea how the world really works. And so when they hear this kind of stuff being talked about, they think, oh, it's a conspiracy theory, when it's the very thing that people in graduate study international relations would be studying.
Yeah. So another interesting topic, and Church of the Eternal Logos recently did a stream about divide and conquer. The idea of, getting us to, getting the right and the left to battle it out and hate one another so that we're divided. I don't know, anything you want to talk about that, the dialectic stuff and what's going on with that?
Yeah, well, that's probably the most basic strategy for empire, is to make sure that any potential power block that might challenge you got to basically make them into microstates. So you basically divide them up. Now, that's a geopolitical tool, but the analogy is the same for anything else. So when it comes to America, if you wanted to destroy America and put it into a new system, you would utilize all those same strategies. So basically, the American empire which is, I believe, intentionally ready to, they want it to collapse to move it into the global government, which they're basically just unrolling right now, which we've been talking about for 20 years. But the number one way to do that is basically to atomize and destruct from within in all possible ways. And so that includes every type of setting each group or classification of people or systems within the society against one another. So black versus white, male versus female, intergenerational conflict, get the generations to hate each other, blame each other. And I know I make boomer jokes all the time, but I'm just making jokes. So people think I'm like really trying to, somebody said I was an agent of the system because I was making boomer jokes or something. Like, it's just a joke. But yeah, so the divide and conquer is really just the strategy number one for how really large power blocks are able to keep any potential enemy at bay and weak. Because if you can't organize against it, then you can't beat it. So the easiest way to make sure that nobody can organize against you is through things like controlled opposition, provocateurs, right? Intentionally fomenting internal division. And that doesn't mean that it's always wrong to separate or divide. Sometimes it's necessary to do that. But sometimes that is a technique, as you're pointing out, and it's manipulated to get everybody to hate one another, to get everybody to fight with one another. And yeah, you mentioned the silent weapons, I think is what you were talking about. I just did the part 2 of that white paper last night, and that actually says that really the divide and conquer is to just basically disempower everybody as individuals so that they don't have families, so that they don't have extended families that they're connected to, And then those families are no longer in the way of the corporate state. There's no firewalls, basically. There's nothing that blocks or has a check on the power of the superstate.
Wow. Wow. I want to go back to your faith a little bit. And I know you do Christian apologetics, and you said something once that really stuck with me. You said that nobody should be doing apologetics unless they've read the Bible 4 times or something like that. I really like that. And I myself, as I keep telling my audience, I'm brand new to Christianity. So I really appreciate the videos that you've made about Christianity, Orthodoxy, again, the debates you've done with atheists and Gnostics and Muslims. They're all really fascinating. I learned so much. And anything you want to share about your passion for apologetics?
Right. Well, one thing I would say is maybe a misunderstanding, not that you misunderstood this, but a lot of people might, I've even heard people who think they're Orthodox to be like, oh, we don't do apologetics. That's a Protestant thing. It's not a Protestant thing. It's in the Bible. I mean, yeah. Jesus does apologetics pretty consistently when he's discussing and debating with the Pharisees. Mm-hmm. Paul does apologetics throughout the book of Acts when he goes and debates in the synagogues, proving that Christ was the Messiah. Many, if not most, of the church fathers did apologetics, especially disputing and debating with various heterodox sectarians and whatnot. So apologetics is part of the Christian faith, although not everybody has to do apologetics or is called to do the same level or degree of apologetics. But so it's not primarily about debating. Actually, apologetics is about strengthening our faith. So that's maybe a common misunderstanding that people have is that, oh, you're trying to pick fights with people, and the whole point of this is just for you to go and like show off and make people mad. No. The point of it is actually to strengthen the faith of the faithful. And one way that that's done is not just by debates, but also learning the weaknesses in other people's positions. So you could literally do apologetics and never have done a debate at all, right? Because it may not require a debate. I mean, perhaps you learn a lot of good apologetics, and rather than debating, you just field questions from family members at Thanksgiving. I mean, that might be the way that you do apologetics. So it's just wrong to think that it has to be about a debate. Now, some people who are good at debate might do it that way. And we're in a weird situation where like people are so uneducated that they actually think debate is somehow bad or evil or mean. Debate is part of classical education. So people have just been robbed of fundamental aspects of classical education, like rhetoric, like debate, like logic, which they should have gotten in their education. But actually, as the white paper says, they were intentionally dumbed down so as to not have debate, to not have critical thinking, because critical thinking empowers you. It allows you to not be deceived. If you, for example, study basic fallacies and you learn some of the basic fallacies, if you're aware of that, when you go out in public and you see billboards or when you see ads on TV or on the radio, you start to notice, hey, wait a minute, that's a fallacy. Like they're wanting me to, for example, buy this product on the basis of some weird emotional manipulation, or they want me to support this war because of some single case of a refugee or something, and the war might be not about that at all, right? Or they want me to maybe credit card company wants me to get in debt right now to have what I want right now. So in other words, the methods of advertising, just as an example, utilize a lot of fallacies and appeal to our emotions to bypass our reasoning and critical faculties. And in fact, in advertising, they do that on purpose. So while you might think that, well, I don't care about critical thinking, I don't care about apologetics and debate, that's for philosophy people. Well, the world operates on a lot of these fallacies, because fallacies are really, in a way, just kind of lying. It's like a version of a lie, where you're doing illicit moves. It'd be like playing chess and you're doing an illicit move, and if you do that, well, you're not really playing chess anymore, right? It's a violation of the rules of chess. So in the same way, when it comes to logic and critical thinking, there's rules to that. You can't just do whatever you want, right? And for example, cult leaders. One reason we might want to do apologetics is because a lot of cult leaders dupe people and entrap people and sort of coax them into cults by bad arguments, by fallacies. Oh, if you just come to our meeting and just sort of sit on the middle of the prayer rug and put your fingers like this, and when you feel a warm sensation, you'll know that everything that Guru Boomer Pajna Hari says is correct, right? Because you'll feel it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe our feelings are good indicators of things, but maybe sometimes they're not. Sometimes we can have feelings that are deceptive.
Yeah.
Well, how do we, so if we can't judge it just on the basis of a feeling, right, because we admit that we can all be deceived, then that's where critical thinking and apologetics comes into play, where it doesn't solve every issue, it doesn't answer every question, but it gives us kind of a basic framework to steer away from paths that would lead us to something bad. So we're not going to fall into the cult that tells you to you know that it's true because you pray a prayer and you feel a burning in your bosom, or we know this religion is true because Guru Pajnahari had a vision and it told him it's true, right? We need more than that. We need substantial reasoning to believe that that's true. And so again, these are just examples of where and why critical thinking and by extension apologetics comes into play, so that we don't get deceived, so that we don't get duped, so that we think in a godly way.
Yeah. And anyone watching who is interested in this topic, we will recommend our friend Father Deacon Dr. Ananias and his channel, The Norwegian News. And he puts up videos. He's a professor and he has a lot of his own lectures on his YouTube channel. So like you said earlier, Jay, you can get an education for free on YouTube with people like you guys. And I also wanted to share this book that I just bought. I haven't read it yet, but I really don't know that much about fallacies either. So I'll put the link to this in the description. Logically fallacious, over 300 logical fallacies. And especially for anybody who's homeschooling their kids or not homeschooling, anyone that has a teenager, please buy this book and have them read it, because it's really fun actually too, because it's just example after example of different fallacies that we interact with all the time. And like you said, if we don't know that we're being manipulated, it's not.
Yeah, it's a great tool to have in your arsenal. And I mean, things are so bad. I mean, in terms of education has been so degraded that it's not like you've got to go get your PhD. I mean, if you just know the basic common fallacies, you're going to be like way ahead of 99% of the people. I mean, it's that, sad in terms of the state of education, but yeah, so it's not like you have to, and I mean, Father Deacon, he is a specialist in epistemology and logic. So he goes, way deeper into that field than I do. That wasn't my main focus of study in terms of philosophy. So he goes, further into that stuff than I do, but he's definitely, better at that stuff than me. But just knowing kind of the basics, as you said, is really, enough to put you kind of ahead of the game for, what most people are duped by.
Yeah. So I would really love to talk about your books. I read the first one. I'm starting the second one. I want everybody to buy these from Jay's website instead of Amazon. And I think you signed them, right? You signed.
I do. Yeah. Everything from the website. Yeah. I'll sign it.
Which is so cool. So for people who think that movies are just about entertainment and have no idea what these books you wrote are about, please summarize for us what you know about Hollywood and kind of some of the agendas behind the movies that we think are just merely entertainment?
Yeah, well, so that book, like I said, was really just a collection of essays from when I was blogging a lot back in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And at the time, I was studying undergrad and then grad classes on how movies are used in terms of psychological warfare, which is a fascinating topic that I kind of accidentally stumbled into. I never planned to really write on that. I had separate interests, on the one hand, in the so-called conspiracy, espionage, geopolitics world. I'd always had some interest in that. And then separately, I had an interest in, movies, and I was really involved in theater when I was in high school. I was in the senior play. We did West Side Story. So which is ironic because West Side Story is about to come out in the theater. So I was actually Bernardo. So I was the bad guy, but I guess I've always been kind of a villain character. But so I wanted, when I was 18, 19, I was like, I want to be an actor. That's all I want to be. And if I need to do stand-up to be an actor, I'll do that. So I'd planned to either move to New York or LA, and that was what I was going to do. And then I had different providential things happen in my life, which that ended up not happening. And I got into more of the academic side of things. And so I had a class by a professor who I wouldn't say he's a conspiracy theorist, but he's more like an old line liberal, like a 60s liberal. And he was a huge fan of Oliver Stone. And so we did this class that was one of my most fascinating classes I had, called Hollywood History. And so we basically watched most of Oliver Stone's films, and we compared them to our best records of those historical events. So we did El Salvador, we did Nixon, we did JFK, we did probably a few more. We might have done Scarface, although that's not technically historical. There's, all the mob, organized crime movies are more or less based on different composites. But anyway, we did a bunch of Oliver Stone movies. And I remember starting to realize that, well, hey, wait a minute. So Oliver Stone is basically kind of positing that the movies are propaganda, which is weird because he's a director. So that was my first kind of exposure to that idea. And around the same time, I was reading some different conspiracy books that dealt with Hollywood, that dealt with movies. And I thought, well, everybody knows that if you write a conspiracy book, you're already automatically, from the vantage point of most people, it's not credible. So I thought, well, why don't I try to look at this from the academic standpoint and see if there is any academically credible idea to movies and fiction playing a role in intelligence agency operations, espionage, and propaganda and psychological warfare. And turns out, yes, there's actually several professors who had already written on this topic. Now, I wasn't a professor, but I'm just saying that I had found out that, like, this is not unheard of, right? There's at least multiple books. There's a Tricia Jenkins book. She's a professor in Texas who wrote a book called CIA in Hollywood. There's another famous book that's written by, I think, two professors, called Operation Hollywood, which they had put a documentary out in the early 2000s, I think, of the same name, Operation Hollywood, which I think you can still watch that on YouTube, which is pretty good. So I was reading more and more about that back in the day, and I read some other kind of big, thick tomes related to that back in the early 2000s. And then I thought, well, I don't remember how I even came across, something prompted my interest in James Bond. Maybe even Alex Jones mentioned it or something in a show a long time ago. But I heard that was Ian Fleming, the guy who created James Bond, was also this high-level spy. So I thought, well, that's weird. Like, maybe I should look into that. And it turned out that, well, that's actually a really, like, glaring, staring up everybody in the face example of a connection between one of the biggest franchises in Hollywood and real espionage intelligence operations. So then I kind of bought a whole shelf of books on Ian Fleming and his life and his history and the Bond series. And turns out there's a whole field of study called Bondology, which Umberto Eco had written one of the first essays on Bondology. And that was interesting because I'd read a lot of his fiction books, like Foucault's Pendulum, Name of the Rose. Now I think he's a Gnostic sort of esoteric guy. He used to be a Catholic, but then he became a kind of a Luciferian sort of Gnostic person. And he would always entwine that into his writing. So that made it more interesting that he had written a famous essay on one of the first famous essays on Bondology, on narrative structures in Ian Fleming. And so then I knew that I was onto something. There is something here. So I got deeper into that, basically. Long story short, I think there was about a 50 or 60 page section of the first book that kind of touches on different Bond films and the symbolism in the Bond films. And again, I'm not like, there's probably 20 other academic writers that have published on that topic. So I didn't end up finishing my master's thesis on this because I had a huge falling out with my sort of crazy liberal professor. And I realized I wasn't really going to go anywhere in the world of academia, and I was just going to be piling on more debt to get into the PhD program. And I was going to spend all this time doing, and so basically I just published what I had written as a scholarly essay, which, so you can look me up. I do have one peer review published paper, which was originally going to be my master's thesis. And it's called, what's it called? Something like Many Layers of Meaning in Ian Fleming's 007 or something like that. But it's published in the Journal of American Sociology and Economics. So I didn't end up doing that. But what I did end up doing was I should just actually publish this as a book. So I took all the essays. I forget the actual thesis. I took all the essays I'd written, which I was just writing as practice, and put them into that first book. So yeah, that's the idea. I mean, I'm rambling, but the moral of the story here is that the more I went down that rabbit hole, it's not just Ian Fleming that was the a key connect between these two seemingly different worlds of espionage and intelligence and movies. There's actually many cases of this. And so more you read about, you find out many of these famous Hollywood people were actually spies. Many of them were informants for the FBI. Many of them were working for the OSS. So there's just more and more and more of these instances piled up that it just became a fascinating just realm of its own. And so now I actually have friends. I have two guys that are buddies of mine that are doing their PhD on this type of topic, and they had read my book, which got them interested. So it's actually a growing kind of realm of academia, of kind of looking at the interplay between Hollywood and intelligence.
Wow. I think probably Eyes Wide Shut is one of the more well-known films that you've analyzed, and your part one is Hollywood, Babylon, and Kubrick.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talk about Spielberg. Yeah, I loved the section on E.T., Close Encounters, because I was a child of the 80s, and then Minority Report, you talk about that. And have you talked much about the Matrix trilogy? Or I guess there's 4 now.
Yeah. So you said you just got part 2?
Yeah, I just bought it. I haven't started reading it yet.
Yeah, so I do the whole Matrix series in part 2.
Oh, great.
So I do go into that, and yeah, I think so being that I wasn't just interested in the intelligence, espionage, propaganda stuff, I was also interested in philosophy and mysticism and hermeticism and all that stuff too. What the book is a collection of film analysis and essays. It's kind of like a different way to analyze movies. Like, if you've listened to Ebert or any of these people that do their film reviews, it's very, they did this and the production team was good to do this and the acting was good, so watch this or don't. But I just thought that was really boring, so I wanted to go into much more detail. So it's a lot of different types of analysis. So sometimes it's not about the connection between Hollywood and the CIA. Maybe it's about what is the religious symbolism that's being used in this film? What is the propaganda that's being used in Spielberg to prepare us for, believing in aliens? So it's a lot of different types of layers and levels of analyses in that book. And Eyes Wide Shut is a classic one, like you said, where I go into kind of how is Kubrick portraying the power structure's relationship to cults, and how does that relate to Hollywood cults, which we know, of course, at the time, Tom Cruise was big time Scientology. Well, he still is a big time Scientology guy, right? So here you have this central character in the film who's interacting with a cult, where in real life he's in Scientology. So all these kinds of weird things, and then Scientology has this big long crazy past with connections to military intelligence, CIA, etc. So all these parallel worlds, you could say, were always popping up, and so that's kind of what I went into in the various Kubrick chapters, because his are the most obvious for just high level symbology. So any Kubrick film is going to be packed with everything has meaning. So everything has where the camera is, the type of camera, the colors that are being used,
right?
It's just packed with all that. So they're a lot of fun to decode. You play movie detective and decode them. But the Matrix, I did go deeper into that in part 3, or excuse me, in part 2. And I think that really the Matrix, well, it's a lot of things, but it looks like the Matrix is probably really just prepping us for virtual reality in the metaverse. But it also has sort of quasi-religious themes too, which are really, just to put it simply, neo-Gnosticism. I mean, the Matrix is just a completely neo-Gnostic mythos that, the analogy is that we're trapped in a world created by an evil god that we need to be freed from. And so Neo becomes the new man, and he's the sort of figure who frees us from this prison that the creator God has put us into, which is just classic Gnosticism.
Right. And then at the end, I just noticed in the table of contents, you have a whole section on transhumanism. So for people who have no idea what transhumanism is, can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. So this is a term coined by Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley's brother. And Julian wrote the book Philosophy of UNESCO. So he was really one of the pioneers of the United Nations educational and cultural arm of propaganda. And so if you read the Philosophy of UNESCO, you really, again, you see how it harmonizes with what's in Quigley's Tragedy and Hope. It harmonizes with what Klaus Schwab writes about today. So, that was written, I think, in the 40s or 50s, going from memory. But basically, it's just a restatement of eugenics to be updated to biometrics and biological security. So rather than it being an outright thing where we want to, pick the fittest of the species in a strict eugenics type system, they reword stuff, and even says this in the book, but we'll have to reword everything because eugenics has a a bad name from Adolf and other people like that. So now we'll reword everything to be biometrics, and then we'll make it into a situation where it's about the green agenda. So basically it's rewording everything to the green agenda. And he also says that we're also going to have to take over and commandeer evolution such that we can steer and control the evolutionary development of humankind into synthetic biology, into becoming robots, into merging with machines. That simple. So it's not sci-fi. It's a real, I'm not saying that they're necessarily going to achieve that, but from their vantage point, it's a real thing. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's really what the technocracy is all about, is what Klaus said recently in some lectures, and which is in his book, Fourth Industrial Revolution, is that it's the merging of the biological with the synthetic.
Yeah. So before I forget, there was something I wanted to ask you. You had KGB agent or something as like your tagline somewhere. I saw that on Telegram or somewhere.
It's on my Twitter, yeah.
On your Twitter. So I know there's a backstory. You interviewed somebody, but now I don't remember the whole story. Can you tell us why like what the story is.
Right. So I've done multiple interviews with people on RT or from RT, which is Russia Today. And then, so what happens is that people who are in the trad Roman Catholic camp, they love to take anything associated with Russia or Russian Orthodoxy and just say, therefore KGB. Mm-hmm. So if you've ever interviewed anybody from RT or anybody's been on RT, or if you've been on RT, which is ridiculous because, I mean, people all over the Western world and in the government have been on RT. So it's like, so is everybody a KGB agent? I mean, it's just kind of a ridiculous thing, especially given that the KGB doesn't even exist anymore. I mean, the KGB has been defunct since,
I know, that's what's so funny about it.
The 80s or 90s. I mean, basically since, right, the Soviet Union collapsed. But so if they wanted to be more accurate, it would be, wouldn't I be FSV or FSB? But I mean, there's not, it's just more of a way to, I just think it's funny. So it's just kind of laughing at, and then the other thing they say is that I'm a secret Satanist occultist. So I'm a KGB agent sorcerer. So it's like all of those at once. But half the time the other people are like, no, he's forged for the CIA. So it's like, am I KGB or am I CIA or am I like the greatest spy in the history of the world where I work for every intelligence agency at once? So it's just like a joke to where I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. I work for all of the spy agencies and yeah, but there's not, I mean, the funny thing is that if I really was that, I mean, everything is tracked and traced and surveilled. Don't you think I would have like been arrested a long time ago? And like, wouldn't I be in jail for espionage? I mean, I'm a public figure on the internet, you know, like the NSA and all these agencies track everything everybody does. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, wouldn't it have been really easy to just kind of like, but I mean, who knows? I don't think that the people that say that kind of stuff, they don't really know really what they're talking about. And the other thing too, is that a lot of people don't know what it's like when you go into media and when you do media work. So they think they'll sort of draw these connections that, oh, if he was on that guy's show, he works with that guy. When literally all I did was send an email and say, can I interview you? And then and most people who have a book or they're promoting something, they'll do an interview with you. So it's not that hard to do it. And once you build a decent sized audience, you can, most of the time people, not all the time, but most of the time, many times people will come on your show and they'll do an interview. So people then that don't do media and don't do interviews, like they, in their head, they sort of draw these conclusions that, oh, well, the only way he could have gotten that guy to do an interview is if he was working with him, or he was working. The only way he would have gotten on Alex Jones is that if he was secretly working for, the CIA or something like that. And it's just ridiculous because, like, I've been here working really hard for 12, 13 years, blogging, podcasting, making videos, building an audience. Anybody who's followed me knows that. So it's not like there was it's kind of insulting too. Like I didn't work hard to get here. I just, I don't know, was recruited into something and then I got all these freebies or something like that. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. And most of the people who say that, again, they don't know anything about how this stuff really works. They don't know anything about media. They've never done any media work. Yeah. They don't run their own business even. So it's just kind of silly.
Yeah. I have an old friend who is canceling me because I was a guest on somebody's show who there's a hit piece written about him drawing conclusions all the way out to white supremacy. And my friend is a far left progressive liberal. So now my husband and I, kind of like you, my husband and I have a joke now that I'm a white supremacist and this is my platform for hate. And that's the main thing I'm doing with this channel.
I was looking the other night at some of the more recent reviews on my Esoteric Hollywood one. Mm-hmm. And what's funny is that there was a couple, I mean, there was like 95% positive reviews, but then I was looking at a couple of the 1-star reviews that were saying how bad it was. Mm-hmm. And I could tell they hadn't read it because they were like, this author believes in QAnon, which my book came out before there was QAnon. And as soon as QAnon came out, I made a video saying I don't believe in QAnon. So it was just obvious that they had never read the book, but they were like, this is an evil conspiracy theorist. This person believes in QAnon. And it's just like, you obviously didn't even read the book. There's nothing about QAnon in there.
Yeah.
There's nothing in my book even about race.
Yeah.
So that's just what people do. Is that you realize that, and probably some of these people are probably paid to do this. I don't even know, but
Yeah.
that's what
Possible
happens.
too. Okay, so I had written a few notes, and one of the things that you talk a lot, because you know so much about history, and I have to admit that I really don't. So I'm learning about like the revolutionary spirit throughout the last couple centuries and kind of how that's evolved, and then talking about like atheism and nihilism and how that's all linked up. I mean, I know it's a huge topic, but what would you say about the revolutionary spirit?
So, well, the reason I know about that field is because I had two classes, one in undergrad, one in grad school, that were about the French Revolution. So I had a really in-depth, my professor was a specialist on French Revolution, so that was like his whole thing. And so he really made us like grind the millstone when it came to studying that. And so in the undergrad class, he made us read, I think, 2,000 pages of history on French Revolution. And then in the grad class, we had to do even more, going from memory. But so we got really deep into that. I have a whole I don't even care that much about the French Revolution. I just took the class because I thought it sounded interesting, that, you know, the history of revolutionary philosophy or something like that. And so like I have this whole, you know, shelf now of French Revolution stuff. So but it was good because in the long run, what ended up happening was I really got well educated on revolutionary thought. So that would be, you know, all revolutionary thought, not just the French revolutionaries, but, you know, revolutionary thought in the time of the Jacobins and Robespierre and Danton and all those guys, Marat, and then revolutionaries into even the 1800s, which I don't know as much about that, but the revolution continues into the 1800s. And really, this is why it's a revolution that occurs throughout the world, which takes the ancient and medieval world from monarchies to democratic republics. So the whole world has been affected and changed by revolutionary philosophy. So it becomes very incumbent upon people who want to understand history. I did do a separate degree in history. It was my minor, and I was, I think, one or two classes away from a double major in philosophy and history. But I know more about philosophy than I do history, but I know a decent amount about history. So, but I don't want to give the impression that I'm like I'm not a historian per se, but it's definitely interesting and relevant. I love history quite a bit, but so revolutionary, I'm more of a historian of ideas, I guess you could say, than historical events. So I'm not very good with remembering all the historical dates and whatnot, but one of the key books about this is the book Fire in the Minds of Men. And this is by a famous historian and academic named James Billington, who was the Librarian of Congress. So as the Librarian of Congress, right, he had access, you know, to, you know, quite a few unique historical documents. And Billington gives a history of what he calls the revolutionary faith. And he points out how there's always kind of been a religious impetus to the history of revolutionary philosophy. So he doesn't like go back to like the ancient world, but I did actually go back to the ancient world because I knew that a lot of revolutionary philosophers were influenced by the Greeks, and not just Plato, but Plato played a big role in influencing the revolutionaries of the French Revolutionary period. And by the extension, obviously, the American Revolution is part of the French Revolution. So they're kind of connected. I think most people know that. But and I think everybody knows that Greek philosophy, right, plays a big role in the Declaration of Independence and the philosophy of America. So the history of Freemasonry, this is where Freemasonry comes into play, because, of course, the lodges were crucial for the revolutionaries, both in America and in France and in other countries, to sort of plan the revolutions. So revolutionary philosophy is not identical to Freemasonry, but it connects to it in a big way because, of course, Freemasonry has a lot of influence from Greek philosophy as well. Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, even the Democritus or Atomus, they all, Pythagoras, they all play a key role in influencing Freemasonic philosophy. So a lot of the lodges functioned as hotbeds of revolutionary thought. So, one of the first chapters, early chapters in Billington's book is that a lot of the revolutionary philosophy comes out of these occult groups. So he has a whole chapter 4 is on the occult origins of revolutionary philosophy. And of course, Jamie and I just covered, she read Manly P. Hall's book, Secret Destiny of America, which also backs up this thesis. He's, of course, one of the most famous Masonic philosophers of the 20th century. He was very influential on Ronald Reagan. And Manly P. Hall wrote in his book that America's secret destiny is precisely to bring in this revolutionary democratic republic utopia that will change the whole world. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily true, but that's what Manly P. Hall says about America. Mm-hmm. So, and he would have, of course, said the same thing about the French Revolution. So, because it's the same lodges with varying and competing philosophies behind both the American and the French Revolution. So the spirit, I would say, of revolutionary philosophy ultimately is the idea of just simply overthrowing God, overthrowing the idea of a creator God, and by extension, any power structures or authority over you. Those then become oppressive or oppressors. So you can see the logic of this leading to transhumanism because, well, why should my biology limit and confine me? You see, now that becomes an oppressive thing, a structure that I need to rebel against. Why should the family unit confine me and limit me? That's oppressive. I need to rebel against that and overthrow it. So basically anything that can structure or limit or set up walls is conceived of then as an oppressive structure to destroy. Now, sometimes things can be oppressive. You can have a tyrannical regime, but the problem is that the logic of the revolutionary thinker or philosopher or Gnostic or whatever is that he is asserting himself as God. He wants no limitations. He wants to be the determiner of all limitations. So it's ironic because every individual revolutionary is essentially asserting himself as a God figure, which requires that he then dole out punishment upon anyone who disagrees with him, which limits and confines people. So it's a constantly contradicting thing where, right, like the revolutionaries who tout all of this freedom and democracy, once they get into power, what do they do in France? They chop tens of thousands of people's heads off. So they limit and confine in the most extreme way because the revolutionary faith is a maniacal one because it's so nonsensical and contradictory. Another great book that hits this home from an Orthodox perspective is Father Seraphim Rose's book, Nihilism.
Yes.
And in that book, he really just gives the Orthodox presuppositional critique of the whole revolutionary philosophy. So basically what Billington says in, like 500 pages, Father Seraphim Rose just kind of decimates it in 100 pages.
Yeah, that's a great book. I usually have it right here, but I'll put.
Okay, well, there. So yeah, if you've read that, then what I'm rambling about, that's exactly what the thesis of that book is. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned Jamie, and I really enjoy the episodes on YouTube that you do with her. And I've had actually a lot of my audience has asked me to try to get her to be a guest on my show. If that's something
she'd love to be on.
Really, that would be great.
Yeah, she's done tons of podcasts over the years, so she would love it.
And she wrote for a magazine, or she had her own magazine?
So she published, her own little magazines, which they're like coffee table books, basically. So she wrote one on, before I met her, she had written one on social engineering and how the world, the system basically manipulates young boys and young girls and the family as a whole. And then when I met her, she was starting another book on Hollywood mind control. So I contributed and helped her write that one. So that one's kind of it's mainly hers, but I helped her write a couple chapters in that book. But yeah, so she was writing on similar topics as I was, before we met.
And yeah, so I would love, I can't find her on Instagram, so I haven't been able to reach out personally.
I think she's on there. She might be on there, but she doesn't really use what does she use? She uses Facebook some, but she's got all of these weirdos that always hit on her. So she doesn't
she does. She
doesn't check in on a lot of the Facebook messages, but I mean, I can just tell her to message you, and she would love to come on and chat.
So back to orthodoxy, I mentioned at the beginning of our interview here that you were one of the main people that helped introduce me to orthodoxy. And so I would love to, and I know you've heard that from a lot of people too. So what is it about orthodoxy for someone who doesn't know anything about it? Why now, and why so many mostly young men, but also, part of why I started this channel is hopefully to reach out to women, maybe like myself, who are in the New Age for a long time, and then started reading the Bible. And there was about 8 months where I wasn't interested in going to church at all. I just wanted to read the Bible and pray. Right. And then once I discovered orthodoxy, I went straight to the parish and started going and entered catechism. And I knew that Eastern Orthodox Christianity was what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. So what are some other things that you've heard from people who've converted, or what do you see right now in this day and age that would bring so many people to the faith? Because my church has more catechumens than ever, and I've heard that about other churches too.
Good. I mean, I think there's a confluence of things that happened in the last few years that contributed to that. I think that people were really getting more and more dissatisfied with Protestantism and Roman Catholicism, especially the Roman Catholic world, in the last 7 or 8 years since Pope Francis. The pretty quick decline of the Protestant world as well, into kind of collapsing on most of their moral stances in the last 10, 20, 30 years for sure. So that's part of it. I think at the same time, the internet has really opened up people's awareness of things that they may never have heard of. A lot of people would never heard of the Orthodox Church, probably in the West, apart from the internet. So that's another factor. I think that people are craving authentic religion. So they're tired of mega preacher scam artists. They're tired of pedo scandals in the Roman Catholic world. They're tired of hearing just all of the things that really undermine authentic religious experience. So they're looking for that. And I think a lot of people have tried a smorgasbord of things. They've tried the Far Eastern religions. They've tried yoga and meditation. They've tried all these different things, and something is still lacking. So they're willing to continue to pursue that quest. And I guess one good thing about the realm of Christianity is that there's really not that many options. So like, if it's not Protestant and if it's not Roman Catholic, then there's really not many other options. So you only got basically Orthodoxy. So and if Orthodoxy isn't the one, then it's not really going to be Christianity, right? So I think that people are finding that to kind of be really the only standing option that's still there, that hasn't really changed from the first 1,000 years of Christianity. And I think that's a strong testament to its authenticity. And so people that are looking for a healthy traditional way of living, they're just gonna find it there and probably not anywhere else, which is not to say that there won't be. You can find traditionally minded Protestants and you can find traditionally minded Roman Catholics, but there's still, I think, something lacking. And I know that, I grew up with Protestant background and then got into, pretty hardcore traditional minded Protestant groups when I was in my 20s. There's a lot of problems there that I couldn't overcome. at that time, I didn't know about anything other than the Roman Catholic Church. So when I was in my 20s, it was just like, well, it's either the Roman Catholics or the Protestants. I didn't really know about Orthodoxy when I was 21, 22. And I'd read a little bit in books and where I'd seen it mentioned, but I didn't know much about it. And then, so I just thought, well, it's either Roman Catholic or Protestant. And then in the Protestant world throughout my 20s, the Roman Catholic world, when I got into that, the more that I got into that, the more I saw that, again, there's still something missing with why are all of these just mainline Roman Catholic churches no different than the liberal Episcopal and Anglican churches? And it's not matching up to what I read, in the church fathers and what I read about the first 1,000 years of the church. So it was a really long process for me. I mean, even after that, I still didn't convert. I wouldn't say I was a new ager. I basically just was kind of like, I don't know, for several years, and read a bunch of traditionalism, read a bunch of perennialism, Neoplatonism. And it took about 10 years for me to really read my way into orthodoxy, which I'm not saying it was all books, but for me, a lot of it was, I needed to have those questions answered. So I first encountered orthodoxy in 2007. And at that time, I was engaged to a girl who was going through the catechumenate with me in 2007. And I just wasn't ready at that time. And so we ended up deciding not to get married. She ended up marrying an Orthodox priest, ironically, and she went off and, happily married with many kids. And so it actually worked out for the better in the long run, because I don't think if we had gotten married, it would have worked, because I wasn't yet ready to become Orthodox. I was interested, but wasn't ready. And then after about 10 years, I started warming up back to it again and reading more and more Maximus and church fathers and more Eastern fathers, I would say, since about maybe age 32, which was about 9 or 10 years ago. And then, yeah, it took me another several years before, I think 2018, 19 was when I was officially received into the church. But I'd already really, I think by about 2015, I believed Orthodoxy, but I also didn't live near a church. So I was kind of in this weird limbo state where I believed it and I knew all about it. I read all the theologians, but I still wasn't in the church, because I'd also had some bad experiences at the church where she and I were being catechized. So that kind of turned me off for a long time too. But it really took God's providence and just the right amount of time before I found the right church and the right spiritual father, and everything really clicked.
What about the icons and some of the other objections that Protestants have? How did you navigate that?
Well, I didn't come to Orthodoxy from Protestantism. So when I was a Protestant, I was a pretty hardcore Calvinist when I was 19, 20, 21. And I was doing a Protestant seminary at the time, because I just wanted to teach theology. That was really all I cared about back at that time. So I kind of surrendered my interest in movies and acting and all that. And I was like, no, you know what? I'm going to be, I want to teach theology. So I was doing a Protestant seminary at the time. And then that ended up not working out, because I was like, I'm having some problems with Protestantism. I can't make Protestant theology work. And so when it came to icons, basically all I did back at that time, when I was about 22, I went and read actually John Damascus at that time. I read his treatise on images, and I read some other Catholic apologetic works kind of defending that we can have images. So again, I didn't really know we're going to Orthodoxy at that time, but I felt like a lot of the Catholic argumentation just about the connection between the incarnation and religious imagery was strong enough that the Protestant iconoclasm doctrine didn't that fell apart pretty quick. I mean, once the doctrine of sola scriptura falls away, it's a pretty easy logical step towards things like icons and liturgy and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the sola scriptura topic is a big one. And when I came out of the New Age, I connected with a lot of other women that were becoming Christian or going back to Christianity after being New Agers for a long time. And a lot of them, and I'm still, I connect with some of them still on Instagram, but they're really big on relationship, not religion, and sola scriptura. Like, is that in the Bible? Well, then,
Yeah.
so I love sending them to channels like yours or Brother Augustine's if they're, if they're open to wanting to really understand that. Because I've heard Brother Augustine say, if you're really sola scriptura, then you have to be Orthodox because we are, the Orthodox Church came first for one thing, but
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my approach to that was, so for me as a Protestant, I was really hardcore into the doctrines of the Reformation because I was a Calvinist, and the first doctrine that really fall for me was sola scriptura, because I realized, well, if everything in the Protestant ethos hangs on that, and if that falls, then Protestantism isn't really going to work. So what I did was, I didn't really know much about the history of the formation of the canon. This is when I was like 21, 22, 23. So I went and bought a whole bunch of Protestant scholars' books on the formation of the canon. Bought a couple Anglican scholars' books on it, and I bought maybe one or two Roman Catholic books on it. Didn't have any Orthodox books at that time, maybe one book, maybe Ware's book on history of the church. But so I read through, like 5 books on the formation of the canon from different perspectives. And I was like, that's the best way I know how to approach this question. And what I was realizing was that everybody, even the Protestants, the evangelicals, and the Anglicans, were admitting that, tradition plays a key role in even knowing what books were written by apostles, even knowing what books should be included. And then when I started getting into the history of the liturgy and realizing that, actually liturgy played a huge role in the formation of the canon, I mean, that's pretty much seals the deal for sola scriptura being bogus. So
yeah, I love the liturgy so much. It's so beautiful. And speaking of icons, I wanted to mention the one behind me. My audience is going to realize that I have a new icon. It was gifted to me by Alexandra Union. So I want to just quickly give a shout out to her, and she's going to have her website up and running in the beginning of the year. So right now she's not ready to sell this one. And the iconographer is Father Luke Dingman. And if anybody out there has a prayer list, please add him to your prayers. He's in poor health right now, and he's just an amazing iconographer. There's a documentary about him. There's a whole website with all of his work, and I'll put the link to that in the description of this video. But I really wanted to thank Alexandra specifically for just her friendship and for gifting me this incredible icon. It's going to be hanging in my dining room, but I wanted to have it today for today.
Somebody gifted me and Jamie some gigantic icons. I don't know who it was. They kind of kept it anonymous. I think they put their first name in there, but I mean, like, gigantic icons, like crazy. So I don't know who it was, but thank you to whoever that was.
Oh, that's so sweet. Yeah. Being part of this online community and then my church community, so many providential experiences. And I mean, in all my years of being a New Ager, I never had community like this. People praying for each other and just there for one another, and just a deep love. And it's becoming Orthodox has really transformed my life, my marriage, just the way I live in the world. So I thank you again for being part of that. Because I don't know if I probably would have found Church of the Eternal Logos maybe, but your content and just the range of content that you've created is
thank you,
amazing. And
appreciate that. Yeah, it's a weird job. We always have the challenge of when people ask, what do you do? Like, because I hate the phrase content creator. It just sounds so, I don't know, it sounds like you're just some sort of machine that churns out something. And then do you work in media? I guess you could say I work in media, but then people are like, oh, you mean you have your own media, which is like a lesser tier, so you're not really working in media, right? Because you don't work at the local Fox affiliate or whatever. So it's just a weird descriptor. Like, what do you do? I'm an internet person. I don't know what to say. Yeah.
Well, you just give them your website and let them.
Well, that's even more confusing. They're like, what is this? Like, what is all this stuff? This is crazy
I
stuff.
know. I know.
A lot of people, when they first encounter it, they think it's crazy stuff, but yeah.
And then you have Rockfin too. So what's what would you say, like, why should people follow you on Rockfin compared to YouTube?
Well, so Rockfin is a platform that they started kind of as a counter to YouTube and all the deplatforming.
Mhm.
So they've been really good to me. They're really great guys over there. They're awesome. Like, in terms, everything they've done has been awesome. They've been a big help for us. They also just got Pajot. So Jonathan Pajot is on Rockfin too now. And then, of course, our buddy Tristan, our longtime buddy Tristan, is over on Rockfin. And it's, so what I had to try to figure out was, I mean, I don't want to not do YouTube because we built, 83,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Rockfin kind of wanted some exclusive stuff. So we do about a show a week that's exclusive to Rockfin, that's not on YouTube. So things that are maybe a little more edgier and more controversial, we do on Rockfin. And it's really just an alternate version of, like I said, YouTube. It's a video streaming platform, but you can also put articles up there as well and podcasts. So it's just a better form of, it's what YouTube used to be, but it's even better.
Mhm.
So I can't recommend it enough because, at any point I could be just gone and axed from there. And so having built up, all these years of, I mean, obviously I have all my stuff backed up on like hard drives, but when my website got deleted in 2018 from WordPress, that was a huge thing. It devastated me for, a couple months. So I had basically to rebuild everything. So in the long run, that actually ended up being a blessing in disguise, because the website that I have now is way better than the old kind of clanky website that I had, which got deleted with no warning. And so I had to like start from scratch and rebuild all of that. And again, it was a blessing in disguise. But the problem, of course, is that we're all in the same boat. Like, anybody's stuff could just go away, right, in an instant. So the more backups, the more things like Rockfin that we have, which probably eventually I'd like to move to where Rockfin isn't my backup, but it could even be kind of the main thing. And there've been some discussions of that, but I mean, I put so much time and effort into the website. I'm not going to get rid of my website because it's, sort of my main thing. But yeah, so that's Rockfin is like just another additional platform where we put exclusive content.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times I take, after maybe 2 or 3 weeks, whatever was exclusive content on Rockfin, sometimes that comes over to the website in audio formats so that my website subscribers don't feel like they were cheated or something like that.
Yeah,
But
like me, because I'm a website subscriber, but I'm not a Rockfin member.
But part of the thing was that when they asked, when they brought us on, they were like, we would like you to do some exclusive stuff on Rockfin. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to say no because but at the same time,
that's how they can keep their site going.
And also too, Rockfin is technically, it's free. So you can sign up on Rockfin and you get access to, like all the same free stuff that's on YouTube, but then they have the premium for subscriber people. But the difference with Rockfin is that you pay it's like a Netflix where you pay a flat fee of like $10 and you get access to everybody. Mm-hmm. So you get access to Tristan's streaming content as well as mine, everybody basically. So,
and Isaac's on there too.
Yes. Richard Grove, Whitney Webb, Pajot now. So, and I'm sure in the next few years they're only going to grow, and they're going to get more and more creators too. So
yeah, speaking of Richard Grove, I really enjoyed the couple of videos I've seen that you've done with him. Wow,
I like Richard a lot. He was one of my early interviews, and I followed Richard for probably 10 or 12 years. So he's a great guy. I wish we could do more stuff, but I know he's a busy guy. He's got his own thing going, and he's got, family, wife and kids. So he's busy, but yeah, a lot of people always request do more stuff with Richard. So I'm always open to it.
So guys, I want to tell you the archive sections on Jay's website. It includes conspiracy, culture, philosophy, esoteric, apologetics, film review, politics. There's recommended reading. There's a shop. What do you sell in your shop? I don't even think I've looked in there.
Well, that's where you get the books. So if you want to get my signed copies and Jamie's books, and then Jamie makes a special tallow skin cream that's really cool.
Oh.
I use it. A lot of women use it and order it.
Oh, I didn't know about
So
that.
yeah,
That
she
would be
has
a
like
good Christmas gift idea.
she has her own special recipe that she has cooked up. So obviously she's, like me, she's very into organic, healthy type stuff. So we always avoid corporate chemical products, toxins, and all that. So she really sort of engineered that tallow cream, body cream, to be something that we did a live stream the other day where she ate it. She's was arguing that if your feminine beauty products can't be eaten, then they're toxic. So don't put them on your skin.
I love
So
that.
she was demonstrating that. And then I did just because sometimes people don't want to be a recurring subscriber. I put a couple courses where you can just buy the courses. So the Plato lectures and the Tragedy and Hope lectures, you can just buy those separately as a one-time purchase if you don't want a recurring fee. And I did that just to kind of test out if people would want that. And some people have done that. I probably sold, I don't know, 30 or 40 of the individual lecture the courses as a whole. So I might actually, I kind of feel like it's dumb to do that, because like if you pay $5, you can get all those. But then again, some people don't like the idea of a recurring subscription because they think they'll forget about it.
Yeah.
So, whatever people wanted to. So I might add some more of the courses. Like we did all the Gospel of John could be a course. We did all the book of Genesis, which could be a course. We did, the whole Global Elite book series could be a course. But again, it's like, well, if you're going to pay, 50 lectures for the Global Elite book series would be, quite a bit of money. Why wouldn't you just pay like $60 a year to get?
Yeah.
It just does. I don't know. But so I was just trying to give different options and test it out. And, some people like that. So.
Well, I think $5 a month to support you is affordable for just about everyone. And once they discover you, I just think everybody needs to be a member.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So a lot of people ask too, why do you do $60 a year if that's the same amount as $5? Well, because when I started this, I didn't know what was going to happen. I had no idea what to expect. So when I did $4.95 a month initially many years ago, just kind of playing around to see if it would work, then people started saying, why don't you have a yearly? And I didn't want to, there was no advantage to the people that were already monthly subscribers to make it less for them to be yearly subscribers. And then it's a huge hassle for all of the monthly subscribers to cancel and then re-subscribe as yearly. So that's the logic behind why there's no difference in price between monthly and yearly. And then nowadays, seems like most people actually prefer the yearly. So I get more, used to be I would get more of the $5 a month, but nowadays seems like more people just sign up with the monthly. And I can take Bitcoin now, so people can subscribe via Bitcoin. You just have to message me personally. And so anyway, that's why that's like that. And then Patreon, it's all the same content on Patreon. People oftentimes ask, like, why do you have Patreon? And it's just different ways to have access, because again, like when my website was deleted, obviously I freaked out, because it was like, well, this is how I make a living. Like, so then I was like in, emergency mode to have like everything in as many places as possible.
Mm-hmm. And then for you guys who want to further support Jay, you should watch his live streams and send a super chat. You can ask him a question or not, just send a donation during the live streams and subscribe to his channel so that you get the notifications when he goes live. And I think you do what, like 3 or 4 live streams a week. I feel like there's
Yeah,
just
we try to do at least 3 a week, maybe sometimes 4, and then a lot of those are half and half. So the way I make a living is basically that people pay for the second half. So you guys, thank you to you and everybody else. That's how I make a living. Is well, there's super chats and all that contribute to it, but the main thing is the subscriber content. So yeah, thank you.
Well, Jay, any last words for my audience today?
Thank you for having me. It was really cool to just kind of chat about just what I do. And I would say, if people are interested in kind of like, well, what about introductory stuff to the Orthodox faith? If you go to my website and you look in the recommended reading section, there's a tab at the top. There's a couple kind of intro books that I recommend up at the top, so people could access that for introductory material. There's also, if you go to my YouTube channel, if you scroll down below, so all of the first half of the Tragedy and Hope lectures are on the front page of my YouTube channel. If you scroll down below that, there's a lot of the popular debates, and there's a lot of the goofy comedic type videos, and then Esoteric Hollywood. And if you keep going down, you will come to a section called Traditional Philosophy and Metaphysics Lectures. And that is also kind of its own course. And if people are wanting kind of an introductory course to both philosophy and like the philosophy of orthodoxy, and then I get gradually into St. John Damascus's book on the Orthodox faith, which is kind of the first systematic theology of orthodoxy. That's down at the bottom in a series of maybe, I don't know, 10 or 12 lectures as well. So if people are wanting to get that kind of an introduction, I would say go through those ones down at the bottom of my YouTube channel.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Thank you.
So to my audience, thank you guys for helping me grow this channel. As I said, I have 1,000 subscribers now in only a little over 3 months, and it's due to my amazing guests like Jay and you guys who share my videos. And I do also want to mention I have a Telegram group for women interested in Orthodoxy. There's baptized women, there's cradle Orthodox, and then some of the women just found out about Orthodoxy a week ago. So don't feel like you have to be experienced in the faith to join. It's a lot of fun, and there's about 70 of us in there now. So send me a message on Instagram if you'd like to join that. I'm at A Devotional Heart. If you want to further support my project here, I have a link in the description to PayPal if you'd like to make a donation. I'm going to have to upgrade my equipment here pretty soon, so you'll be helping me do that so I can keep making videos. And make sure to subscribe so you get notifications. I do premieres 2 nights a week or so, 5 PST, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we have a lot of fun in the chat. And thanks again to my amazing moderators who hold down the chat, and love you guys. You guys know that. So once again, Jay, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
I will. And what's the best way for Jamie to get in contact with you? Because I'm sure she would like to come on.
Great. Yeah, on Instagram, just or Telegram, A Devotional Heart. I'm not on Facebook, so those are the 2 best ways.
Okay. I'll get her info to you.
Great. Oh, my audience
cool.
will be really happy about that.
All right. Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you and have a blessed day. Bye.
You too.